Hi there, my name is Alexandra Koritoru, and I will be going over Chapter 18 from Sidman, Positive Reinforcement in Institutions. So, of course, this chapter is going to talk about the benefits of positive reinforcement and how it can actually get diluted and potentially changed to negative reinforcement. So, we're first going to start off with the misuse of deprivation and how we think it's actually positive reinforcement, but when there is no environment that needs any such thing, we, as in anyone who has a sort of power in their jobs, in their life, wants to essentially take something from someone to have something over them, aka coercion. And so we then try to give it back to them for positive reinforcement. But these things are their basic rights and privileges, and we're just using their rights to hold it over their heads. Also, deprivation is another sense of not having enough. And in this little portion, it talks about how we can teach students, especially with learning disabilities, how to positively reinforce them through food. So deprive them of a food and learn that way. There's actually I have a life example for this. One of my students who I helped to recommend to go to their doctor, to their pediatrician, and then today they actually got evaluated, so I'm really looking forward to seeing what their results come back as, and I was very proud of myself for pointing that out to the parents and them being quite receptive to their child having a learning disability, because I saw some of the cues that we've been learning, not just in this lesson, but throughout this whole year that I've been studying with George Mason. But one of the parents was saying how proud they are of their child, but they couldn't understand why when they were learning a few months ago, the student didn't really like learning and just like basic flashcards, like A is for apple, but then nothing fun, just flipping it over and the kid would be like S, apple, S, apple. There was no real enforcement for the kid to really know the letter A. But then the mother was telling me on the phone, that, she started rewarding him with gummies every time he got one right. So now he is up to the letter F, and she's really proud of him, and if she was wondering if this was a great way to do this. And I was like, that's a great way to do that. That's exactly what we learn, in a sense, that the children should be rewarded with something that they do enjoy. Don't get me wrong, this kid gets gummies at lunch anyway. He just likes them. So it's not like they're quite depriving him of the gummies, but it's just another positive reinforcement for him to know the letters of the alphabet and get a positive treat. Next, we talk about timeouts and its abuses. At my school, actually, they don't talk about timeouts. Actually, I'm not allowed to say the word timeout at work. They do believe that it is a negative connotation for the child. So I say go take a break. I do have an area, and I do like the way that this chapter describes it, that the child should be taught its boundaries and saying no. And then, of course, there is a consequence, which is the timeout. I had an instance today where, sorry, I was trying to think about what happened today. A few things happened, where one of my students pushed one of my kids into the cots and cubbies area because they had toy confusion of who was playing with what, but there were clearly two kids, two toys, but one kid wanted that particular toy in the other boy's hands. So obviously I don't tolerate that kind of behavior in my classroom, so I ended up sitting out the child, and I told him the rules again, and I asked him to tell me what happened. He was obviously not feeling it. He's one of these kids that kind of shuts off as soon as he gets in trouble. He's not really used to it. His mother does not like to discipline him in even this harsh of a sense. So I eventually told her that when she came to get him, that he was not allowed to play. But I did explain to the child, I don't just leave a child there to dilly-dally around. And I personally don't make timeout a fun experience. He wanted to get a book, and I said, nope, you didn't want to talk to me, you didn't want to tell me what was wrong, so you don't get to read books. And I know that you're in the library having your space, but if you're going to have harmful hands, and you're not going to tell me why you're going to have harmful hands, and you're not going to use your words, you cannot even read books. And he got real serious and just like sat there, and I was like, sorry kid, timeout is not fun in my classroom. I would prefer if you had fun and used your words, but if you're not going to use your words, you are definitely not going to be playing in my classroom. And so this little section of the chapter talks about how sometimes being in timeout can actually reinforce timeout, in the sense of you giving attention to the child in the way that they wish for, but they can't actually properly express themselves. So they actually are getting in trouble to get your attention so that they can be in timeout. And so the little tidbit here is to take things more slowly and to take advantage of newly available methods for reducing and even eliminating errors. So I'm always going over classroom rules in my classroom, and some of my kids just literally roll their eyes at me, and they're 4 years old, and they're just like, not again, Miss Alex. And I'm like, hey, we had one instance, it could turn into 5 today. I'm not having it. You know my rules. Let's go over them, and then let's go play, and then be mindful of each other. The next section, which I really liked, was prisoners of learning environments. And this section pretty much talked about, juvenile delinquents and younger people getting into trouble for any particular environmental reason, that they could be in a gang, they were working outside of the law, they were selling drugs, anything that could benefit them, but obviously not within the rules of the law. And so and then obviously when they go into prison, they are deprived of their social norms, and then they do their time, and then there's nothing to be done for these individuals. They still have their same mindset. No one has particularly worked with them to change or advance their lives in any particular way, and then they go back into their settings, and they are stuck right back with that gang, right back to stealing cars, right back to whatever they were doing before, and then get right back into prison. However, there was an opportunity for a prison to change its ways, because it's kind of stuck in its old ways of prison guards being very rude and very rough. And they wanted to make prisons more of an educational kind of experience for people who were not educated and who had to leave the school system and drop out to be criminals. This actually made me think of that episode where from The Office, when Prison Mike comes in to into the conference room, and it's Steve Carell who's just pretending to be Prison Mike because they all found out that there is a criminal, there's an ex-convict in the office, and Michael Scott evidently rats out who the criminal is, and then, puts on his bandana and goes, yo, I'm Prison Mike, and prison's really bad, and I got in for, stealing. Sorry for my horrible impressions. And the guy actually, the reason why I'm thinking about this is because the guy actually tells them that prison was more of an educational kind of background. Yes, he went to a can't remember if it was blue collar or white collar kind of prison, but you know, they had courses, they had recreation time, they you know, had good dental plans or whatever. And I've actually read stuff like that. So people in these unfortunate circumstances tend to like being in prison because it is safer and more enforcing, more of like a positively enforced environment, reinforced environment for them so that they can progress their lives. So pretty much there was a project made where um, people would sign up, they would get these kind of uh, currency, and they would apply for classes. They would take them. It was like school, so they had to test out and do really well so that they could advance to the next level. And then it all became about social skills and pardon me, and about progressing in their lives and becoming successful. And all of these different types of duties that they had to do, which were to gain the credits. There was a store that would have supplies for all of their classes. There would be a stationery section. There would be anything that would be beneficial for their day-to-day life once they got out. Private space time. If they got good grades, they were able to just take some space and have their own little time to read, write, do whatever. And then other privileges. This was the job that they did during school hours. So I found this very fascinating throughout this whole chapter. And obviously structure is always important. And I'm a preschool teacher, so obviously structure is important for little guys, but I think structure is important for everybody. And I liked this section a lot. And I liked this last quote at the end, which was the best way to prevent juvenile crime and give young people the opportunity for satisfying, productive lives is not to lock them up, but to steer them in the right direction before serious trouble starts. So that also refers back to our school systems of people, of teachers. You know, we already have such a like load on our shoulders of schoolwork and lesson planning and our students. And yes, it's sometimes hard, and you have to see that student who's struggling so much. But you know, there are opportunities for these kids, and they do need structure somewhere. Some of my parents, I work at a school that is well off, and you know, parents are structured, but they really like my structured classroom, and I'm just fortunate for that. But I do try to have an impact and structure every classroom that I'm in.